Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right that this is a complex scenario, but there really is no need for us to be in one of the troughs in the supply chain at the moment. We've got Chiltern Railways, which has massive overcrowding because it's got the oldest fleet in the stock, and they are desperate for more trains on that network. And we have East West Rail about to launch with borrowed diesel trains rather than new hybrids or hydrogen trains which are fit for the modern age. So can I ask my honourable friend, as he looks to what can be brought forward, to prioritise Chiltern and to prioritise getting trains onto East West Rail that people want to see?
Mr. Speaker, I know that my honourable friend, another excellent member of the Transport Select Committee, has written to the Secretary of State, and we are lining up a meeting so we can discuss Chiltern's rolling stock. He knows that I'm very keen that there's a solution found with regards to some rolling stock that is available, and that's what I'm looking to take forward. He asked about the situation with East West Rail. The consultation will go forward this summer, and I referenced the testing of a battery-powered train that went for 86 miles. I believe that the route from Oxford to Cambridge is 84 miles, so that would suggest that could be the answer to the point that he rightly makes.
Mr. Speaker, I've been the chair of the all-party group on manufacturing for some time. I actually worked in manufacturing at one stage, and I represent a fine Huddersfield, despite other claims in this House. I am the Member of Parliament for Huddersfield, a fine manufacturing town. But can I say to him, this is about job losses. And is he aware that under this government, since 2010, the manufacturing sector in our country has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. It's now only less than 10% of people in this country make anything. That is a dire situation. And not only is it rail, it's defence. I represent a town that makes the engines for tanks and for guns and ships and all that sort of stuff, but they don't get the orders in time. The fact of the matter is all our wonderful manufacturing towns and cities are in peril under this government, and what's he going to do about it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was the same Huddersfield that I went and visited because I was with the team from the Trans-Pennine route upgrade, where we are investing £9 to £11.5 billion upgrading that route, which will make it not only better for rail passengers, but will also and is providing thousands of jobs, the bulk of which are within the local workforce as well. And they're very proud of that, of the Trans-Pennine route upgrade team. So again, that rather demonstrates that what the honourable member has just stated is not backed up by the facts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during the pandemic, it was quite clear the government rightly stepped in to support train operating companies through huge subsidy. That essentially meant subsidising the profits of those companies. The Minister also knows that Roscoe's, rolling stock companies, have been, since the time of British Rail, been privatised, a highly profitable and lucrative business. And actually, in my view, has had very little value for the taxpayer whatsoever. So I wonder, Mr. Speaker, whether the Minister can consider two things. One, actually, in this situation for Hitachi and for Alstom, to seriously consider direct government intervention to stop these companies going to the wall before they can actually get the next orders in, and to urgently convene a meeting of local businesses in both those areas with all of the rail unions, from Unite to TSA to ASF to RMT, bring them together to actually discuss how we jointly work together to make sure that our brilliant and long sort of held highly skilled workforce are not just thrown on the scrap heap for decades to come.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a lot of the finance that I talked about and the orders that have been brought forward, which is why we have a relatively young fleet, is because we've had train operators that have been able to use their own balance sheet in order to invest. Now, of course, since the pandemic, rail finance is only back to about 80% of where they were pre-COVID due to the changes in working patterns. Then that has been more of a challenge, which is why the government and the taxpayer takes on more of the burden. In terms of the meeting with the unions, I should just reference the meeting I had with union representatives from Alstom and Workforce, who were absolutely superb. And I found that the way they wanted to do their business in a sensible, calm, but of course, they challenge, and rightly they do. That provides us with the motivation to try and intervene and deliver a solution. And that's what the Secretary of State is doing right now.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The potential loss of jobs at Hitachi in the North East will hit the North East economy as a whole. And it's absolutely vital that we maintain this rail manufacturing capability there. So what is the government going to do to make sure that we don't lose that facility because there's a gap in orders? What will the government be doing to ensure that that doesn't happen and to save those jobs?
Mr. Speaker, so it's important to note that Hitachi are not currently consulting on any changes in workforce, but they, of course, are concerned and they speak to honourable members in this place for those concerns to be put through to us, and I welcome that approach as well. Again, in terms of what are we doing, so those train operators where their rolling stock is older and needs renewing, we are putting those out to market, so that's TransPennine, that's Northern, that's Southeastern, that's Chiltern. And bringing those orders through will obviously assist. But again, I come back to the export part. If our fleet is getting younger, and it means that there won't be as many orders, then we really need to see our 4 great train manufacturers being able to export more abroad so that that delivers for UK PLC.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What further discussions is the Minister and the Secretary of State going to have with the manufacturing and rail unions on this matter?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already stated that I met with the Alstom unions myself. I'm always very happy to meet with the unions, as indeed they need to do so. But at the moment, our work is with both Derby Council and, more importantly, with Alstom, who will ultimately make the decision. They're a private operator in terms of their business, and it will be the decision for them. But what we want to do is to show them what we can do to assist in terms of orders and other assistance, and that's why we've been working across government to provide that reassurance so that we sort of work towards them not only keeping their plant, but also investing further in it and bringing more of their enterprise to the UK.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers? I don't think anybody in the House could doubt the Minister's commitment or government's commitment to improving things, and we thank them for that. Can the Minister outline what strategy government has to support manufacturing companies throughout the United Kingdom to make improvements to attract business and sustain contracts? And will government commit to ensuring that all government contracts are fulfilled with British manufactured products as standard to give confidence to investment in British manufacturing? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Look, I thank the honourable member. He always puts his points with such sort of kindness, but also consideration. And he actually makes better points as a result than some that get chucked around here. In terms of the answer to him, I can provide him the assurance that by writing, as I did, to the train manufacturers and meeting with them, listening to them saying they wanted the certainty, they wanted to know what the pipeline is. And we've been working with the Treasury to bring that pipeline forward. And then the Secretary of State's letter adds another angle, because what we're doing there is writing to the Roscoes to finance train refurbishments to see if those can be brought forward as well. So we're doing everything we can from our side within the difficult legal and commercial situation that we can find ourselves in, to do things correctly, to bring those orders through, to give more certainty so that those companies will continue to invest in the UK.
That completes the urgent question. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Theresa Villiers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to provide for the prohibition of the sale in England of horticultural peat by the end of 2024, to provide for certain exemptions to that prohibition and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, peatlands are the UK's largest carbon store. They contain more carbon than the forests of UK, France and Germany combined. And they're home to some of our most iconic and rarest wildlife, such as the bittern, the swallowtail butterfly, the short-eared owl and the hen harrier. But less than 20% of our peatlands are in a near-natural state. 87% of England's deep peat areas are degraded, damaged or dried out. This is caused by a range of factors, including overgrazing and drainage for agriculture, but also because of extraction for compost and other growing media for gardening and horticulture. Extraction degrades the state of the wider landscape, damaging wildlife habitats and reducing peat's capacity to prevent flooding and filter water. And of course, extraction means that stored carbon is released, contributing to climate change. So this bill would implement the 2022 commitment made by this government to prohibit the use of peat products in amateur gardening in England by the end of this year. In 2011, DEFRA announced support for phasing out peat products, with a commitment to legislative, a voluntary approach proved to be ineffective. The government's 2021 consultation received more than 5,000 responses, 95% of which supported a ban on retail peat sales. The Royal Horticultural Society is backed to ban, and Professor Alistair Griffiths, its Director of Science and Collections, said in 2022, peatlands are the world's largest carbon store on land, with great potential to store carbon long-term, helping to reach net zero. To tackle the climate and biodiversity crises, it's essential that we have a sustainable transition to peat-free alternative growing medias. The RHS stopped selling peat-based growing media bags in 2019 and will continue to work with DEFRA industry and gardeners to accelerate the transition to peat-free. Mr. Speaker, we take pride as a gardening nation, and the COVID lockdown triggered increased enthusiasm for this great outdoor activity. There's already been a big shift to non-peat compost products, thanks to the efforts of the horticulture industry, to DEFRA ministers, to campaigners like Monty Don, and thanks to responsible choices made by gardeners. But peat can still lurk in gardening products such as potted houseplants and trays of bedding plants. The presence of peat in these products is rarely labelled, meaning even the most ecologically committed gardener may not know it's there. Even the most effective information campaign can only go so far in changing behaviour. So I think gardeners should be able to buy from a garden centre without fear that their purchase will harm the environment elsewhere. There are now reasonably priced peat-free compost using materials such as bark, coir and bracken. And thanks to a decision by the Environment Minister, solid digestate from anaerobic digestion will soon become another source of peat-free growing media. Peat alternatives for products like potted plants are also available. Companies like B&Q have gone peat-free, as has Kew Gardens, and the Royal Horticultural Society is 98% of the way there. Which the consumer organisation excludes peat-based compost from its product comparisons. While it acknowledged that some peat-free products do cost more, it believes that there is now a good range of lower cost options on the market. The horticulture industry has had since 2011 to prepare for the phase out of peat. 13 years on, some real progress has been made. Peat use more than halved between 2020 and the end of 2022, including a reduction of nearly 70% in the amateur sector. In 2022, professional use of peat fell below 50% of their total consumption of growing media for the first time. But UK horticulture still used 950,000 cubic metres of peat in 2022, including 471,000 cubic metres in the retail sector. I acknowledge that only a comparatively small proportion of the UK's peat is affected by extraction for horticultural purposes, but by targeting the demand for peat, we can help keep it in the ground both here and overseas, preventing damaging release of carbon. As well as an immediate ban on peat products for retail use by the general public, this bill would give ministers power to use secondary legislation to extend that ban to professional horticulture on a future date. This reflects the fact that there are still barriers to be overcome before we can be confident that reasonably priced peat-free products and production materials are available in the professional sector. But we need progress there too, and I would urge the government to press ahead with a clear timetable for full transition to peat-free products across the horticulture sector. Limited exceptions to the ban will be needed, some of which may need to be permanent, for example, in relation to science and research and rare plants. But the 2030 target has been on the table for over a decade, and I call on both the industry and the government to ensure meaningful change is delivered by the time we reach that 2030 milestone. So UK horticulture moves into its peat-free future, and we seize the opportunity to become a global leader in supply of sustainable compost and growing media. So in conclusion, this bill needs to be just one part of a wider strategy to achieve the government's ambitious target to restore 35,000 hectares of peat by the end of 2025. This United Kingdom is custodian of 3 million hectares of peatland habitats. That includes 13% of the world's blanket bog, a globally rare ecosystem protected by international treaties, one example of which I was pleased to visit in County Fermanagh back in 2014. More money is now being invested in peat protection and restoration than ever before. Growers can apply for funding for the equipment they need to transition away from peat. DEFRA's 2021 Peatland Action Plan is backed by 50 million from the Nature for Climate Fund, a fund which I was pleased to secure a commitment to in the Conservative 2019 manifesto. And the work has been taking place on projects such as the Great North Bog and at Rookup in the North Pennines, which I visited on a bitterly cold, windy day back in 2020 with a local MP, my right honourable friend for North West Durham. Perhaps even more significant than the Nature for Climate Fund commitment is that England's new ELMS farm support schemes embrace peatland restoration, potentially meaning a major long-term flow of funding for this vital task stretching into the future. Not only does peat play a vital environmental role in our distinctive island habitat, it's also part of Britain's history, identity and culture. Landscape ecological planner Jennifer Dowdall described it as a grand encyclopedia, a storehouse of pollen that can help us understand our ecological history and the changing climate. Peat's miraculous capacity to preserve organic material has meant that it can offer up evidence of the gruesome practices of our ancestors when so-called bog bodies are discovered thousands of years after these men and women met a grisly end. And Seamus Heaney was just one of several poets and writers to reflect on the deep, rich peatland earth of these islands. Removing peat from amateur gardening gives this House the opportunity to recognise the value of that cultural and ecological heritage, to take active and practical steps to protect and restore precious natural habitats, and to take us closer to our goal of reaching net zero and preventing disastrous climate change. And Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
That the right honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, I don't object to my right honourable friend having the right to bring in the bill, but I think it's important to put on record that when the bill is brought forward, it will not go unopposed, because I think that much of the content of this bill, which my right honourable friend has described, seems to be disproportionate, not based on science or fact, and another exercise in gesture politics. And if we remember today, it's going to be another day when the banners seem to want to get out there and destroy legitimate activities that other people are engaged in. And I would like to put in a plea on behalf of amateur and professional horticulturalists, because those who have been to plant centres over the last year or so will have noticed that the move to peat-free products has resulted in the quality of those products declining significantly. Their longevity has declined because they do not have the natural water retention in their pots, which is provided by a peat and cannot be substituted by peat substitutes. And so the consequence of that is that it's becoming increasingly difficult for our own domestic horticultural industry to be able to cope with the pressures to reduce peat consumption. And by contrast, Mr. Speaker, we know that almost all our products coming through garden centres at the moment and being planted out in gardens and flower boxes across the country, that a very high proportion of those products come from the Netherlands. And the Netherlands, what is the Netherlands doing about this issue of peat? And the latest figures that I've been able to ascertain show that in 2020, the Netherlands imported 2,156 million kilos of peat. and 44.5% of that came from Germany, 9.5% from Estonia, 9.2% from Latvia, 7% or so from Lithuania, and 5% from Belgium. And what happened to that peat? It was then put into plants which were exported to countries such as the United Kingdom, thereby creating an unfair advantage compared with our own homegrown industries. And my right honourable friend seems to want to go beyond the voluntary approach and to ban professional horticulturalists in this country from being able to use peat in the production of plants, thereby facilitating even greater unfair competition coming from the Dutch. And peat, what proportion of peat is actually used in horticulture? A very small proportion, Mr. Speaker. I'm told that about 95% of the peat that is consumed in the world is used for peat fires and is put into domestic boilers. It's also put in to mega incinerators and is a substitute for coal or even natural gas. And I concede that use of peat is extremely dirty. But why is it that we are just concentrating on one particular niche industry in our country, namely horticulture, and ignoring the much larger problem around the burning of peat as fuel? And I looked up this morning whether it would be possible in this country to buy peat for fuel. And there is a company which is offering to provide me with a pallet of 25 kilos of peat for no less than £235. So you could buy peat in this country for fuel. Why are we trying to concentrate on banning peat in horticulture where there is no real substitute? Some people talk about coir as being a substitute, but coir, the production of coir is mainly carried out in the Far East and in particular in Sri Lanka. That coir has to be washed and desalted before it can be prepared for horticultural use. It then has to be transported halfway across the world, and it is not an ecologically friendly way of producing a peat substitute. And my right honourable friend, the noble Lord Benyon, who deals with these issues in the other place, I think was spot on when he said in a debate in the other place last year, in answer to a question from Baroness Humphreys, who was concerned about the lack of a level playing field for EU imports, he said, the noble Baroness asked a very important question. We could act unilaterally, which would result in the export of jobs, skills, and benefit to our economy to countries which are not bringing in measures as rigorous as we are. We want to ensure that we are operating this in the same way as we buy timber, where we recognise the impact we are having globally as well as nationally. We are seeing a massive reduction in the use of peat, and we want to see it end. We have set forth a clear timetable for that to happen. The target of 2026 with certain exemptions will mean that there will be a tiny amount left which will continue to be used. That will maintain some key areas of our food security, such as mushroom production. And he could have added blueberry production, because peat, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is very acidic, and that is why if you try growing blueberries in non-acidic soil, you'll find that they die very quickly. And the noble Lord Benyon then went on to say that in answer to Lord Curry of Kirkharle, he said, in every policy area, there's an unintended consequence unless we fully consider it. In producing alternative media, there is sometimes a cost to the environment. If we are buying coir from abroad, what impact is that having on some very vulnerable parts of the world? There are many other growing media with which which we have to ensure that in our determination to protect our remaining wetlands and peatlands, we are not exporting the problem and causing problems further afield. It's a very difficult issue, as the Noble Lord has recognised, and I assure him that we are all across the subject. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm concerned that we are not going to be all across the subject if this bill goes through, as proposed by my right honourable friend, unopposed, because what we need to do is we need to make sure that any legislation on this is balanced and proportionate and takes into proper account the needs of our homegrown horticultural industry.
The question is that the right honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Selene Saxby, Chris Grayling, Miss Sarah Dines, Robin Miller, Andrew Selous, Dr. Therese Coffey, Tim Lawton, Tracy Crouch, Sally Ann Hart, Trudy Harrison, Siobhan Bailey, and myself, sir.
Teresa Villiers.
Horticultural Peat Prohibition of Sale Bill.
Second reading what day?
26th of April, Mr. Speaker, sir.
26th of April. Thank you very much. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Tobacco and Vapes Bill, second reading.
Now. Minister to move second reading.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, before I start, I should declare an interest. Before I was elected to Parliament, I used to prosecute serious organised crime, including organised crime gangs that attempted to import illicit cigarettes. I beg to move that that bill be now read a second time. For a moment, if I may, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would like us to imagine that we're not in this historic and magnificent chamber, but we are instead standing at the entrance of a local hospital. A patient comes through the doors, struggling to breathe. Smoking sent their asthma spiralling out of control. A minute later, another patient passes by. Smoking caused the heart disease they're battling. A minute later, another person comes in, and then another. This vicious cycle repeats itself nearly every minute of every day in our national health system. Because here in the United Kingdom, almost one hospital admission a minute is the human cost of smoking. Smoking leaves people with premature dementia. It puts them in care, attached to oxygen for the rest of their life. It increases the risk of stillbirth by almost 50%. It is responsible for 75,000 GP appointments every month. And it takes around 80,000 lives every year.
We should give way on that point.
I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. I urge anyone who's come into this debate today to go to a respiratory ward. As I served on for a year in my first junior doctor role, to watch people gasp for breath, struggle and fight with their relatives there asking you to do something as a doctor, and you simply can't. If this is a step forward to stopping that situation, then I am very much in favour of the Secretary of State taking it forward.
Well, may I thank my honourable friend and for bringing in his professional experience into the chamber and the real-life consequences that he has seen for his patients. I'm going to be unpacking, if I may, some of the details behind his invaluable intervention, but the premise behind this is exactly as he says, to stop the start. Because there is no safe level of smoking and no safe tobacco product. In fact, it is the only product that if it is consumed as the manufacturer intends, it will kill 2/3 of its long-term users. Now, this bill is not about demonising people who smoke or stopping them from buying tobacco if they're able to today. It will not affect current smokers' rights or entitlements in any way. And indeed, we want to help them to quit. We are supporting them by almost doubling the funding for local smoking services. But instead, this bill is looking to the future to give the next generation the freedom to live longer, healthier, more productive lives. I will.
How does she counter the Conservative argument that if you ban something, you massively increase criminality?
Well, I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend on that, and I'm genuinely going to come on to that because I know that is a concern that colleagues have, and I'm going to develop my arguments if I may. But as I say, reminding him of my declaration of interest, believe you me, I have no interest whatsoever in making life easier for smoking gangs, and this is why I will be announcing as part of this package further funding, further investment for law enforcement agencies, both at the border and also at local level. But some have said, well, this is, and I understand the argument, that the concern that we are banning things. I totally understand the concerns of fellow Conservatives. We are not in the habit of banning things. We do not like that. And so we will only bring these powers in when we are convinced, following a no doubt robust debate with the intellectual self-confidence that we have to have such debates on this side of the House, we come to the conclusion that there is no liberty in addiction. Nicotine robs people of their freedom to choose. The vast majority of smokers start when they are young, and 3/4 say that if they could turn back the clock, they would not have started. That is why, through this bill, we are creating a smoke-free generation that will guarantee that no one who is turning 15 or younger this year will ever be legally sold tobacco, saving them from the misery of repeated attempts to give up, making our economy more productive and building an NHS that delivers faster, simpler and fairer care. I would argue it is our responsibility, indeed our duty, to protect the next generation, and this is what this bill will do. I will give way to that.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way, and she's absolutely right that we should protect the next generation. Labour proposed the smoke-free generation legislation in January 2023. We voted to crack down on marketing vapes to children in 2021. It was the Tories who blocked it. Now, I welcome this bill, but doesn't it just show, well, one, that where Labour leads, some of the Conservatives follow. But isn't she concerned about the number of her colleagues who we can see lined up who are going to vote against this legislation today?
I think that's a brave submission from the Honourable Lady, given the debate in yesterday's in the chamber yesterday. And I certainly won't be taking lectures from Labour on this legislation. The reason that we are bringing this forward is because we have looked carefully at the evidence, and what is more, we have tempered it so that existing adult smokers will not be affected. If the message from the Labour Party is they want to ban smoking completely of adults, then it is for them to make that argument. But we have tempered this carefully to ensure that this only deals with future generations. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I commend her for her approach to young people smoking, for her determination to deal with illegal tobacco, and for her crackdown on vaping, which is a menace to young people, as these things are sold like an item of confectionery. But will she accept that in doing all of those things, that she needs to be open-minded to how this bill can be improved? For the idea of a rolling age of consent, with the consequence that someone of 35 will be able to buy tobacco, someone of 34 not, and so on and so forth, is at best a curiosity and at worst an absurdity.
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend and indeed my close Lincolnshire neighbour. I mean, he knows that with any piece of legislation, of course, I will always want to listen to colleagues and to do business. I would just, however, make the point that the principles behind this legislation is that this generation, these emerging generations, will never take up smoking. That is the point. And so I'll just finish this point, please. And so that is why we are bringing this forward, so that we stop the start from 2027 and future generations will not have that addiction to nicotine. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady and then I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful, and I would say it from the outset, I completely support this bill. Can I say that in Newham, 22% of the sales last year they found was to underage children, higher than alcohol, knives, fireworks, etc. They seized £135,000 worth of illicit tobacco projects in just 6 months. So can I ask the Minister, will she ensure that councils will get the resources they need to be able to continue the vital work of keeping these products out of the hands of the young?
Yes, I can assure her, because not only is the illicit trade often the greatest in the most deprived areas of the country, but as I say, I'm about to develop exactly how we're going to help law enforcement with this, because I do very much understand the concerns across the House about ensuring that the illicit trade does not flourish. I'll give way to my right honourable friend and then to the honourable gentleman.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Has she seen the latest statistics that say twice as many school children smoke cannabis as smoke tobacco? It's already illegal for all of us, not just children, for all of us to smoke cannabis. If a ban really worked, how can she explain those statistics, and how can she show that this ban, stopping people who are currently 15, will be different than the anti-drugs legislation we already have?
Well, just so I'm clear, I don't think, is my honourable friend suggesting that we repeal the Misuse of Drugs Act 1973, under which cannabis is prohibited? And of course, although I have no experience of it myself, I understand that the consumption of marijuana does also involve the consumption of tobacco and of cigarette papers. The point for this is that we are trying to move away from this idea that teenagers, current youngsters, will be able to buy their cigarettes legally in shops from the age of 18 in 2027, precisely because we want to ensure that they can lead longer, healthier lives. And I will be coming on in a moment to some of the stories that the tobacco industry have put around about the myths of the impact of introducing age restrictions in cigarettes, which I think will be of interesting evidence to those who are concerned about this. I'll give way, if I may, finally to the honourable gentleman, and then I'll make some progress.
First of all, Mr Deputy, can I commend the Minister and the Government for bringing this forward? I'm personally of a mind to support it because I believe it's right. That's my opinion in relation to it. But I have been contacted by the vaping groups. I met the honourable member for East Belfast, myself, met some groups of them last week, and they sent me a small comment. I want to ask the Minister a quick question, if I can, in relation to that, so that we're moving forward with the consistency to try and achieve something. They referred to the impact assessment report by the Department for Health and Social Care. They say it fails to consider potentially detrimental effects of restriction of both vape users and those smokers looking to switch. And what they've asked for, and it's to be helpful. I always try, I think we all try, Madam Mr Deputy, to be helpful in our comments in this chamber, to be constructive. So being constructive, they refer to and request to include a vape retailer and distributor licensing scheme in the bill. The industry have developed a comprehensive framework for such a scheme, which is designed to once and for all deal effectively with the issue of underage and illicit vape sales, a situation which could potentially only get worse. Can I ask the Minister, would it be the Minister's intention to do just that, to develop a vape retailer and distributor licensing scheme? Thanks so much.
I'm extremely grateful to the honourable gentleman. I thank him for his support. We understand the level of lobbying that has been undertaken by both by the vaping industry and by the tobacco industry, and we know, of course, that the vaping industry has pushed this as one of their lines. I'm afraid the truth is that when you look at the current market of vapes, when you walk into a local shop, a newsagent, something of that nature, and you see the vape products on sale next to the till, often next to the sweets, where children are, probably certainly going to be very attracted to that part of the shop if my experiences are anything to go by. And they do that and they market it in very, very cynical ways. And so what we are saying is it is already unlawful to sell vapes to under 18s, but we want to take the powers in this legislation to consult on, for example, flavours, design and so on, to ensure that vapes are being sold as they should be, as they are intended, in order to help adult smokers to quit, because no child should ever vape. I'm going to make a little bit of progress, if I may, because I do want to come on to the age of sale, and then, of course, I'll give way. And so the point that my right honourable friend raised about the age of sale in the black market, the tobacco industry claims that there will be unintended consequences from raising the age of sale. They assert that the black market will boom. Before the smoking age was increased from 16 to 18, they sang from the same hymn sheet. But the facts, I'm afraid, showed otherwise. The number of illicit cigarettes consumed fell by 25%, and the smoking rates for 16 and 17-year-olds dropped by almost a third. Indeed, consumption of illegal tobacco has plummeted from 17 billion cigarettes in 2000 and 2001 to 3 billion cigarettes in 2022-23. This is despite, of course, the further controls that this House have placed in the meantime. And indeed, our modelling suggests that the measures in this bill will reduce smoking rates among 14 to 30-year-olds in England to close to zero as soon as 2040. I hope there will be many of us in this chamber today who will still be here in 2040, and this is our opportunity to play that part in history. Thanks to constructive engagement from colleagues across the devolved administrations, these measures will apply not just in England, but across our entire United Kingdom, saving lives and building a brighter future. And having listened carefully to colleagues' concerns around enforcement, we are making sure that local authorities will be able to keep every penny of the fixed penalties they bring in to reinvest in rigorous enforcement. In other words, we are looking not just at national enforcement, but also helping our very, very important and valuable local trading enforcement officers to keep the proceeds from those fixed penalties they hand out. I'll give way to the Honourable, my right honourable friend.
Thank you very much for giving them away. Does she agree with me that this bill will not largely affect people in this House, but affects younger people? And therefore, it's incredibly important to listen to the voices of young people in this. With this in mind, I wrote to every secondary school in my constituency to ask young people their views. The majority of the young people in Chelmsford, when asked for their views, said that they would support the measures in the bill. It's not unanimous, but we work by majority. And given that this affects them and not me, I will be respecting their views when I vote today.
Well, may I thank my right honourable friend, and yet again she reminds us what a brilliant local constituency MP she is, and she's also drawn out the voice of young people in this, because one of the questions I pose of our NHS and the future that I want to build for it, to reform it, to make it faster, simpler and fairer, is the voice of younger people, because younger people, whether if they are in work at the moment, paying their taxes, they are paying for our NHS at this moment, and they will be the users of it in the future. And so part of my role, I see as Health Secretary, is to ensure that it is in a sustainable funding model, that we are doing everything we can to increase productivity, but also to move the demand curve so that it celebrates its next 75 years. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman there, and then my honourable friend there.
I thank the Secretary for giving way. The Secretary knows I take a particular interest on retail crime and the impact of retail crime. The British Retail Consortium indicates that there's about 1,300 acts of violence against shopkeepers across the UK daily. It's been suggested that one of the biggest triggers of attacks on shopkeepers is ask for proof of age. What additional resources can be put in to assist retailers and to make sure that they're protected from attacks?
Well, may I thank the honourable gentleman, and he raises a very fair point. Interestingly, actually, the latest survey of retailers shows that, I think I'm right in saying, the majority of retailers support this. but he knows just how carefully this government has listened to the concerns of retailers and the campaign of my honourable friend in the North East, and I'm struggling to remember the constituency, but Hansard were very helpful. North Antrim, thank you very much. My honourable friend in the North East of England, who Hansard will very kindly insert the constituency name for me, has led a relentless campaign on this, and I was really pleased that the Home Secretary was able to announce a specific crime of affecting retail workers in recent weeks. I'm going to give way, if I may, to my honourable friend there and the my honourable friend there.
Honourable Lady, for giving way. I was one who smoked until 30 years ago, and it was a very hard business to stop the evil weed. But I come from a completely different era, and I am considered to be something of a dinosaur. But I have never. But I do still hope to be here in 2040 as a result. But I wish to God that vapes had been around when I was going through the process of stopping smoking. Does this legislation not need to be very careful that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and stop helping people come off the evil weed?
First of all, I completely reject my honourable friend's suggestion that he is a dinosaur. He brings a great energy and effervescence into the chamber, or indeed any social situation. In terms of, he articulates really well the struggle that an addiction to nicotine has on a person and how tough it can be to give up. That's not a judgment on anyone. This substance is designed to addict, and that's how they make their sales pitch. And so what we're trying to do is stop children from being ensnared in that way. But he is also right that at the moment, the evidence suggests that vaping is a good way to help existing smokers to quit. If you don't smoke, please don't vape. And certainly children should never vape. But what we've tried to do with this legislation is build that balance in so that we are taking powers to look at the packaging, etc., the flavours, and there will be a thorough consultation before any regulations are set, because we want to ensure that we are helping adults to quit. But we want to do so in a way that is considered and well designed. So I'm extremely grateful to him for raising that. And I think I had an intervention there, and then I'll make some progress. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. I mean, it's very carefully what she's been saying. And okay, right, she outlined how the sale of cigarettes or the consumption of cigarettes has collapsed over the last couple of decades. And the Honourable Member for Chelmsford also talked about how the young people that she's reached out to don't want to smoke anymore. But isn't that the heart of the matter? This is why I think this bill is fundamentally wrong and misguided. Young people aren't smoking anymore. It is not called smoke. The number of people are smoking. What this bill should be focused on is more on the vape side of things, on the illegal vapes, the supercharged vapes, the colourful, the flavourful vapes. Instead, we are sitting here debating cigarettes that are naturally being got out of existence anyway, put it to limiting choice, rather than focusing on the dangerous vapes that are addicting to young children. And that's where the government is putting its focus on, rather than wasting our time talking about something that's dying out anyway.
Well, sadly, and I genuinely said, sadly, there is nothing inevitable about a decrease in smoking rates. Indeed, in 2020, the United States saw the first increase in tobacco sales in 20 years. And in Australia, in 2022, the proportion of teenagers smoking increased for the first time in 25 years. And my right honourable friend, the Minister, has just reminded me that here in the United Kingdom, 100,000 young people, young people, take up smoking every year. And so we must not be lulled into this sense of inevitability and security, mindful as I am of how very clever the tobacco industry is at lobbying its messages, because of course we are threatening their business model. But that is, we as Conservatives must take into account this is happening today. And so we must try and ensure that we are tackling this head on. I'll take one more, and then I'll make some progress if I may.
I thank my right friend for giving way, and I think she's making a very, very important point about young people and children smoking today. Not just about cigarettes, shisha smoking in particular in my constituency, in Westminster, in Marylebone in particular, and Edgware Road, has become very fashionable for young people. And we know that an hour of smoking shisha equates to 100 to 200 cigarettes within an hour. Would my honourable friend confirm that shisha tobacco will be included in this bill?
May I thank my honourable friend for bringing the City of Westminster right into the chamber. There are, in fact, 5 times more people smoking non-cigarette tobacco in England today than there was a decade ago, with, worryingly, the greatest increase in young adults. And this, of course, includes cigars and shisha. And so this is why we have said tobacco in all its forms is a harmful product, and therefore we wish to ensure that we are consistent in the policy and the messaging that this is about helping young people to stop the start. I'm going to make some progress and then I will give way. The tobacco industry, as I have already said, questions the necessity of this bill on the grounds that smoking rates are already following. And it is absolutely correct that smoking rates are down, but as I have said, there is nothing inevitable about that. Smoking remains the largest preventable cause of death, disability, and ill health in England alone. Creating a smoke-free generation could prevent almost 500,000 cases of heart disease, stroke, lung cancer, and other deadly diseases by the turn of the century, increasing thousands of people's quality of life and reducing pressure on our NHS. And indeed, an independent review has found that if we stand by and do nothing, nearly 500,000 more people will die from smoking by the end of this decade. So we must ask, what place does this addiction have in our society? And it is a question that we're not just the only ones asking this question of ourselves. We know that our policy to create a smoke-free generation is supported by the majority of retailers and around 70% of the public. Now, I'm going to turn to the economic case, because the economic case for creating a smoke-free generation, I believe, is also profound. Each year, smoking costs our economy a minimum of £17 billion, far more than the £10 billion of tax revenue it attracts. It costs the average smoker £2,500 a year, money they could spend on other goods or services or put towards buying a new car or a new home. It costs our entire economy by stalling productivity and driving economic inactivity. So much so that the damage that smoking causes accounts for almost 7 pence in every pound of income tax we pay. As Conservatives, we are committed to reducing the tax burden on hard-working people and to improve the productivity of the state. This is why this government has cut the double taxation on work, not once, but twice, giving our hard-working constituents on average a £900 tax cut. That is a moral and principled approach. Having celebrated the first 75 years of the NHS last year, I am determined to reform the NHS to make it faster, simpler and fairer for the next 75 years. And part of this productivity work is to recognise that we must reduce the single most preventable cause of ill health, disability and death in the UK. This reform will benefit not just our children, but anyone who may be affected by passive smoking, and indeed future taxpayers whose hard-earned income helps to fund our service. Today, we take a historic step in this direction. Creating a smoke-free generation could deliver productivity gains of £16 billion by 2056. It will prevent illness, promote good health, help people get into work and drive economic growth, all whilst reducing pressure on the NHS. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to the Minister for giving way, and of course we got the highest tax burden for some considerable time. But I welcome this bill, but I'm concerned that the Cannes review estimated that the government's smoke-free ambition would not be achieved in poorer communities until 2044. Now, I have many poor communities within my constituency, so can she outline how this bill will tackle this particular issue? Will it actually be another 20 years before we see a result in poorer communities?
No, because as I've already said in the speech, the modelling suggests that in fact with the younger generation from 18 upwards, we will see, the ages I gave, we will see close to zero smoking by 2040. In relation though to his point on tax, I have to say I don't remember him voting against the government bringing in the furlough scheme, bringing in the support during COVID, nor do I remember him voting, complaining that we were trying to help people with the cost of living. But we as Conservatives understand this is sound money rather than the magic money tree that is going to somehow going to, the magic money tree that is somehow going to fund their £28 billion black hole. I do give that.
I'm somewhat perplexed by this debate and indeed by this bill. I don't see it to be enforceable, and I think that it also fails to take into account the very effective tax measures and health campaigns that have been run by successive governments to reduce the number of smokings. Nor does it also answer the fact that bad and poor diets are likely to kill more people in the long run than smoking. And in fact, if you take the recent study from the Institute of Health in Seattle, which it says more people are dying from malnutrition than smoking, this shows that there is actually a principle at point here. Should the government step in and deal with people who are eating unhealthy food?
Can I thank my honourable friend? Of course, I'm responsible for the healthcare in England, and so I'm afraid I won't trespass on the health needs of people in, I think he said Montreal. But in terms of this legislation, this is about helping children and young people stop that addiction to nicotine. We know it is one of the most addictive substances. We also, as I've said earlier, should not assume that the decreases that we have seen in smoking rates are inevitable. Indeed, internationally, as I've given the examples, there are some places where we've seen the increase. But we also know that there are different ways in which tobacco are now being consumed, perhaps from 20 years ago, including, for example, as has just been raised, the rise of non-cigarette tobacco. And so it is that we are trying to address for the individual's health as well as for the wider health of society. I'm going to take one more intervention. I've already taken an intervention, and then I'm going to make some progress, and I'll come to you in a moment. There we go.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State, giving way, and she talks about addiction to nicotine. If, as she sets out, vaping is a pathway to stopping smoking, why isn't she seeing a vape-free generation coming in parallel with a smoke-free generation? So we have a nicotine-free generation across the board, expanding her legislation to ensure that young people neither take up smoking nor vaping.
So this House has already legislated to ensure that vapes cannot be sold to people under the age of 18. What we are seeing, though, in our local shops is that the vaping industry is finding ways of marketing their products in a way that seem designed for younger minds and younger preferences. Once this bill is passed, it will be the age of 18 will be maintained for vaping, but importantly, we will not be able to see that sale of legal cigarettes or tobacco to those from the age of 18 onwards from January 2027. Now, I just want to, I'm going to make some progress. I want to address some of the measures in the bill concerning vaping, because as the House has already shown, there's a great deal of interest in this. As any parent or teacher will know, there has been a dramatic and dangerous increase in youth vaping. At least 1 in 5 children have tried vaping. And many will say the solution is simply to enforce the law. And of course, that is a vital component, which is why we are investing £30 million in our enforcement agencies and hitting cynical businesses that sell vapes to children with on-the-spot fines. But we must and we will go further, because vaping damages our children's future. It could damage their lungs whilst they're still developing, intensify the long-term pressure on our NHS, and damage their concentration at schools. This is a point that many teachers have made. We cannot replace one generation addicted to nicotine with another, and vapes are cynically marketed towards our children. They are sold at pocket money prices. They share shelf space with sweets. They're branded with cartoon characters, and they are given flavours like cotton candy and watermelon ice. Our children are being exploited, and we cannot and will not let this continue. That is why this bill will give us the powers to crack down on child-friendly flavours and packaging and to change the way vapes are displayed in shops, measures that we will consult on. And through separate environmental legislation, we are banning the disposable vapes that young people favour and that do so much damage to our planet. Some 5 million disposable vapes are thrown away either in bins or on our streets every single week, and that is equivalent to some 5,000 lithium car batteries of electric vehicles being thrown away every year. And so we have a responsibility, we argue, to tackle that harm perpetuated by the vaping industry on our planet. Again, to underline, vapes can be really helpful in assisting adult smokers to quit, but our message remains clear. If you don't smoke, don't vape, and children should never vape. I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. She's been very generous. This bill gives the Secretary of State very wide-ranging powers over flavours of vape, liquid, also packaging and so on. But it doesn't give any obligation on her to consult widely or look at impact statements at all. That is not in the bill. In fact, the word consultation doesn't appear anywhere in the bill. So therefore, I ask whether she'll give a commitment to this House today that she will fully consult before exercising any powers that she's given in this bill.
May I thank my honourable friend for highlighting that. I give this commitment here at the dispatch box that we will, of course, consult. We are very, very conscious of the complexities of this. We want to get it right, and he has my absolute undertaking that we will consult before regulations are brought before the House. Thank him for that. I'm just going to make some progress. In fact, I'm going to conclude, and if the honourable gentleman wants to dive in before I conclude, I'm going to let him do so.
That is so kind of the Secretary of State, and I do appreciate her. I do appreciate the Secretary of State taking these interventions. Given that this is a flagship policy by the government, can she give me a guarantee from the dispatch box this will apply equally to all parts of the United Kingdom? I have raised a number of concerns that because we have a land border with the European Union will insist under the Windsor Framework that they can block this from being implemented in Northern Ireland, as they did with the Danish government when they tried a similar measure. Can I now have a guarantee that if this applies from 2027 in the United Kingdom, it applies in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
May I thank the, my honourable friend, in fact, he raises a really important point. Can I also, through him, thank the new Northern Irish Health Minister, who has been very, very collaborative in bringing forward what needs to be brought forward as quickly as possible, given the historical context, so that we can have this aligned across the United Kingdom. Our intention is absolutely, as he describes, that this applies throughout the United Kingdom. Of course, if he or his colleague in Belfast has concerns that there may be ways in which that could be somehow circumnavigated, we will listen very, very carefully to that. But I should be clear, our intention is that this applies to all children and young people across the United Kingdom, because we want to protect the children living in Northern Ireland just as much as we do in England, Wales and Scotland. I will take...
I'm most grateful to the Secretary of State in giving way with regards to a specific point on tackling illicit tobacco. In 2016, I raised that question with the then Prime Minister because in Medway, we had one of the highest selling points for illicit tobacco. And the maximum sentence that can be given for the supply and sale of illicit tobacco is 7 years. As part of that strategy to deal with illicit tobacco, will the government now be looking to increase the sentencing for the sale and supply for illicit tobacco? Because at the moment, she's right, this party is committed to lower taxation, but tax avoidance and evasion cost this country $2 billion. And if we don't get this right, with regards to imposing this mandatory, the banning of cigarettes, which I don't agree with, because I think we should do it through education and awareness, you are going to get more people buying illicit tobacco, and that cannot be right.
My honourable friend gives me the ideal opportunity to talk about my favourite criminal offence, which is cheating the public revenue. It's a criminal offence, very settled law. It has a maximum sentence of life imprisonment, and I have deployed it myself against the organised crime gangs I referred to at the very beginning of this speech. So an ingenious, oh no, sorry, that's far too, please don't think I'm praising myself, crikey. A sensible prosecutor, sorry, a sensible prosecutor will always look at that criminal offence, because that gives the, it's settled law, it's good law, and also it has the maximum sentence of life imprisonment for those who indulge in it. And so in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to now, I'm afraid, conclude, because I have been, in fairness, I've been generous. In conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we want to build a brighter future for our children and our grandchildren. This means moving from the tossing sea of cause and theory to the firm ground of result and fact. The result of this legislation will be to free future generations from the tyranny of addiction and ill health. The facts include that parents are worrying about youth vaping, and they want us to take on the tobacco and vaping industries. And the result and facts of this will save hundreds of thousands of lives, reduce pressure on our NHS, and increase millions of young people's chances in life. The decisions we make today will stand the test of time. And so for those many reasons, I commend this bill to the House.
Yeah. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Order. I'm going to try and do this as well without imposing a strict time limit. And so if I was you, I should start to think around about 7 minutes as a contribution. Thank you very much. But this does not include you, sir. West Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Until the early 2000s, every pub you walked into was filled with smoke. 1 in every 4 people in this country was a smoker. The last Labour government banned smoking in public places, and it made an enormous impact on the health of our nation. Just the following year, there were 1,200 fewer hospital admissions for heart attacks, according to the British Medical Journal. Since 2007, the number of people who smoke has been cut by almost a third. Our understanding of secondhand smoke grew, and with it, the culture changed around where it was acceptable to smoke. Even at home, people went outside to smoke instead of smoking in front of their children. A study in Scotland found that while hospital admissions for children with asthma were increasing 5% a year before the smoking ban, in the 3 years following Labour's legislation, admissions were down by 18%. In short, Labour helped to build a healthier society. Smoking down, patients needing treatment down, NHS beds freed up, lives saved. But there is more to do. During the 13 years that Labour was last in office, life expectancy